There is a moment right before the machines stop beeping where the room goes quiet in a way that has nothing to do with sound. I remember that quiet. I remember it better than I remember most of the last 62 years of my life, and I want to tell you why. For 25 minutes, my heart did not beat. My lungs did not draw breath. The nurses would tell my daughter later that they had already begun preparing for the worst kind of conversation, the one where you sit a family down and choose your words very carefully, and in that room, while my body lay still on a bed with wires taped to my chest, I was somewhere else entirely. I was more awake than I have ever been in my life, and I met Jesus. What he showed me changed the way I understand every single day I have left on this earth, and I am not the same woman who walked into that hospital. I want to tell you this story exactly as it happened. I am not going to dramatize it for you. I don't need to add anything to it, because the truth of it is enough. I'm just going to stand here and tell you, the way I've told my grandchildren, the way I told my priest, the way I've told anyone who has ever asked me why I am no longer afraid of dying. Let me start with who I was before. I was a wife for 38 years to a good man named Robert, who I lost to cancer 6 years ago. I raised 3 children. I worked as a school teacher for 31 years, 2nd grade mostly, though I did a stretch in 4th grade that I don't talk about much because those were rough years for me personally. I went to Mass most Sundays. Not all of them, if I'm honest with you. I said my prayers the way a lot of us do, a little distracted, a little rushed, running through a grocery list in my head while I was supposed to be talking to God. I loved my faith. I believed in it. But if you had asked me before that day in the hospital whether I truly, in my bones, believed there was something waiting for me on the other side of this life, I think I would have hesitated. I think I would have said yes with my mouth and had a flicker of doubt underneath it. That's honest. That's where I was. I went into the hospital for what was supposed to be a routine procedure, a cardiac catheterization, nothing that had ever worried my doctor in the slightest. I remember joking with the nurse about the ugly hospital gown, and I remember counting backward from 10 as the anesthesiologist told me to. I got to 7. And then everything changed. I don't remember pain. I want to say that clearly because I know some of you are afraid of dying, because you imagine it hurts. For me, there was no pain at all. There was a sensation of being pulled, gently, like a hand had reached down and lifted something out of my chest that felt lighter than air. And then I was looking down. I was looking down at my own body on that operating table, at the doctors moving with a kind of controlled urgency I had never seen before, at the monitor with the flat line on it. I felt no fear looking at myself down there. That surprised me more than anything. I felt something closer to tenderness, the way you might look at a coat you've just taken off and left on a chair. Then the room was gone. I was standing in a place I have spent 6 years trying to describe to people, and I still don't have the words for it, not really. It was not a place made of light the way people describe in the movies, though there was light. More light than I have ever seen. Light that didn't come from any single direction. Light that seemed to come from inside everything at once, including me. There was no cold and no heat. There was no up and no down that I could feel, though I somehow knew I was standing. I felt more myself than I had ever felt in 62 years of living in a body. Every ache in my knees, every bit of tiredness I had been carrying around for years without even noticing it anymore, all of it was gone. I felt like a much younger version of myself, but it wasn't about age, it was about weight. I had put something down, and then I was not alone. I want to be careful here, because I know how this sounds, and I have had 6 years to think about how to say it in a way that honors what actually happened to me. I did not see a man in white robes with long hair the way he's painted in the pictures in Sunday school. What I experienced was a presence, and the moment it was near me, I knew exactly who it was, the way you know your own mother's voice in a crowded room, without needing to turn around and look. There was no question in my mind. None. I knew I was in the presence of Jesus the way I know my own name. What I can tell you is that the feeling that came with that presence was not the feeling of standing before a king or a judge, though I had always imagined, if I ever got that close, I would tremble. Instead, it was the feeling of being fully known and fully loved anyway. Every mistake I had ever made in my life, every unkind word I had ever said to my husband in an argument that didn't matter, every time I had been short with a student who needed patience instead, every doubt I had ever carried about my own faith, all of it was somehow visible, and none of it mattered in the way I thought it would. There was no shame in that space. There was only a kind of understanding I have never experienced from another human being, not even the people who love me most. He did not speak to me in English, and he did not speak to me in words at all, not the way I'm speaking to you now. It was more like knowledge simply arrived in me, whole and complete, the way you might suddenly remember something you had forgotten, except this wasn't a memory, it was something being given to me. The first thing I understood, without being told in so many words, was that my time was not finished. I understood this the way you understand. You still have chores left to do before the day is over. There was no argument about it, no negotiation. It was simply true, and I felt at peace with it immediately. Though a part of me, a very human part, did not want to leave that place at all. But before I was sent back, I was shown something, and this is the part of my story I feel called to share, because I believe it was not only for me. I was shown, in a way I can only describe as being folded into my understanding all at once, 7 things. 7 quiet signs. Not signs of the end of the world, though I know some people who have heard pieces of my story have wanted to make it into that kind of testimony. A doomsday story, a countdown to some catastrophe. That is not what this was. What I was shown were 7 quiet signs of when a soul's own personal end is drawing near. Not the end of humanity, but the end of a single, particular, precious life, so that we might learn to recognize the sacredness of that season instead of fearing it, running from it, or missing it entirely because we were too busy to notice. The first sign I was shown was a softening of the need to be right. I saw, as though watching from above, elderly men and women in their final years who had spent decades holding tight to grudges, defending their opinions, needing to win arguments with their children and their neighbors, and I saw how, when a soul draws close to its final season, that grip begins to loosen on its own. Old arguments stop mattering. There is a peace that settles in that has nothing to do with growing tired, and everything to do with growing wise. I have seen this now in my own life since I came back. I don't need to be right anymore, not the way I used to. I let things go so much faster now. The second sign was an increased tenderness toward small things. I was shown people noticing sunlight on a wall, the sound of a grandchild laughing in another room, the taste of a simple meal, as though for the first time, or the last time, though it was neither. I understood that when a soul is nearing its final chapter, it often begins to fall back in love with the world in small, quiet ways, the way you fall back in love with an old friend you had drifted from without ever meaning to. The third sign was a pulling toward reconciliation. I saw people reaching out after years of silence, picking up the phone to call a sister they hadn't spoken to in a decade, writing letters they had always meant to write. I understood that something in the soul knows, even when the mind does not, that unfinished business between people is one of the heaviest things we carry, and as the end nears, there's a pull to set it down. The fourth sign was a loosening grip on possessions, not sudden or dramatic, just this quiet, growing indifference to the things people had spent their whole lives accumulating and protecting. I saw closets being cleared out, not out of grief, but out of a kind of freedom. I understood that when we are close to the end, our souls already know that none of it comes with us, and there is relief in finally, truly believing that, instead of just saying it. The fifth sign was more vivid and frequent dreams, particularly of loved ones who had already passed. I was shown that this was not confusion, and not something to be dismissed by well-meaning doctors as a symptom of medication or age. I understood that as the veil between this life and the next grows thin for a soul nearing its transition, those who have gone before draw closer, and sometimes they visit in dreams to prepare the way a familiar face waiting at the airport gate makes an unfamiliar journey feel less frightening. The sixth sign was a deepened hunger for meaning over comfort. I saw people who had spent their whole lives chasing ease suddenly wanting, more than anything, to matter, to leave something behind, to say the important things out loud, instead of assuming there would always be more time to say them later. I understood this as the soul's quiet insistence on being remembered, not for what it had, but for what it gave. And the seventh sign, the one that has stayed with me most powerfully every single day since I returned, was an unexplainable sense of peace that arrives without any change in circumstance. I was shown people in hospital beds, in hospice rooms, in their own homes in ordinary armchairs, whose bodies were failing, whose diagnoses had not changed, whose pain had not lessened, and yet whose faces held a stillness that had not been there before. I understood that this peace is not denial, and it is not the body giving up. It is the soul beginning, gently, to come home, and being met, even before it arrives, by the same love I felt standing in that place of light. That peace, I was shown, is one of the surest signs that a soul is being welcomed, not abandoned. I want to say clearly, because I think it matters, that I was not shown these signs so that we would spend our remaining years afraid, watching ourselves and the people we love for symptoms, treating every quiet moment of peace as an omen. That is not the spirit in which I was given this. I was shown these things so that we might stop being so terrified of a season that is actually sacred, so that when we notice our mother letting go of an old grudge, we understand it as grace, instead of worrying it means something is wrong. So that when we ourselves feel that strange, undeserved peace settle over us in hard seasons, we don't fight it or question it, but let ourselves rest in it. When I understood that I was being sent back, I did not want to go. I want to be honest about that, because I think honesty is the only thing worth offering you today. That place was more like home than any home I have ever had here. But I also understood, in that same wordless way, that I still had something to give. I was not finished. There were still people who needed me, words I still needed to say out loud, instead of assuming there would always be more time. Coming back into my body felt like being folded very suddenly into something far too small and far too heavy. I gasped so loudly, the nurse later told me, that she nearly dropped the tray she was holding. 25 minutes. That is how long I was gone by the clock on the wall. It felt, on the other side, like both no time at all and more time than I could ever measure. I spent the first several months after that, unable to talk about it, without weeping, not from sadness, but from the sheer weight of trying to carry something that large in a body this small. My children were patient with me. My priest listened without ever once telling me I was imagining things, which I will always be grateful for, and in the 6 years since, I have watched every one of those 7 signs play out, again and again, in my own life and in the lives of people I love, and people I have simply had the honor of sitting beside in their final seasons. I no longer fear the sight of an elderly parent letting go of old arguments. I no longer worry when my grandchildren tell me about a vivid dream of their grandfather, my Robert, visiting them in the night. I understand now what that means. I no longer see a hospice room as only a room of loss. I see it now, as a room where the veil is thin, and where something extraordinary is quietly beginning. I am 62 years old. I do not know how many years I have left, and for the first time in my life, that uncertainty does not frighten me. I know now, with a certainty deeper than anything I have ever believed before, that death is not an ending, and it is not a punishment, and it is not something to be fought against with white knuckles until the very last breath. It is a homecoming. It is being met, exactly as you are, with every mistake and every doubt intact, by a love that has been waiting for you the entire time, patient and gentle, and utterly without judgment. I did not come back from that place to frighten anyone. I came back to tell you this. Pay attention to the quiet signs, in yourself and in the people you love. Reconcile the things that need reconciling now, while there is still time to do it face to face. Notice the sunlight on the wall. Let go of the arguments you no longer need to win. And when that strange, unearned peace settles over you in a hard season, don't question it. Let it hold you, because I promise you, from the other side of that 25 minutes, it is real, he is real, and none of us are ever alone. Thank you for letting me share this with you today.